Welcome to the verse-by-verse study of the book of Proverbs. We shall finish chapter 6 today. Again, we have a father offering godly wisdom to his son. The topic is a return to, quote, sex education, unquote. Our sexual choices are the theme that is repeated throughout Proverbs. In fact, there are over 80 verses related to sexuality in the book of Proverbs. So it begs the question, why are there so many verses regarding sexuality in Proverbs? Because God knew we needed wisdom in this area. What he created for good, sinful man often attempts to pervert. When it comes to sexuality, many folks are misinformed, misguided, especially our youth. As a result, we make poor choices that can leave deep, devastating scars for a lifetime. Scripture is telling us that it's the job of the parents, both mom and dad, as we'll see in verse 20, to prepare their children to make wise decisions, especially in this area. Let's take a look. My son, keep your father's command and do not forsake your mother's teaching. Bind them always on your heart, meaning write them on your heart. Fasten them around your neck. When you walk, they will guide you. When you walk through life, they will guide you. When you sleep, they will watch over you. When you awake, they will speak to you. The wisdom will speak to you. There's just so much power and effectiveness when both mom and dad are on the same page, when they're in agreement, when they are teaching and modeling God's wisdom as a team. Wisdom is such a precious gift to give to our children. Wisdom is what shapes their heart and also their brain, and therefore shapes their future, because it shapes their future behavior and happiness. Wisdom that guides them away from the misery of sexual abuse, broken marriages, pornography addictions, sexual insecurity, unhealthy choices. The author again is speaking about the choice of purity versus choosing infidelity, choosing love over lust. Wisdom that teaches that infidelity brings pain and devastation to families and relationships. The term infidelity here, or lust, is used in Proverbs is called adultery. Recall from chapter 5 the definition. Adultery is the act of being unfaithful to your in relationships and also to God, to defile, to pollute. It also includes not only sex outside of marriage, but as Jesus said, it also occurs when we invite and feed lust within our hearts. That too is a form of adultery. Pornography is an example. Seeking self-gratification at the expense of others is infidelity. Let's look at God's wisdom, his instructions, beginning in verse 23. For this command is a lamp. This teaching is a light to our paths. And correction and instructions are the way to life, keeping you from your neighbor's wife, from the smooth talk of a wayward woman. Do not lust in your heart after her beauty, or let her captivate you with her eyes. Here, this term, wayward woman, is a metaphor for sinful sexual temptations. The word wayward means to seduce, to tempt, both via our eyes and also our ears. You and I cannot always block out whatever we see and hear, but we can control what we feed, what we choose to fantasize about. There's a big difference between an involuntary glance and a steady diet of premeditated consumption that reshapes our heart and our brain. We can make that choice. The old saying that the wolf that thrives is the one that you feed. Either you feed the good wolf or the bad. That is both biblical and scientifically true. The author would drive home his point beginning in verse 26. For a prostitute can be had for a loaf of bread, but another man's wife preys on your very life. Now, the Living Translation and the New King James does a better job in capturing the meaning. For a prostitute will bring you to poverty, but sleeping with another man's wife is even worse because it will cost you your life. Then in the New King James, for by means of a harlot a man is brought down to a crust of bread, and an adulteress will prey upon his precious life. This verse begins with for, which always means this is an expansion of the previous verse. So the author is describing two types of adultery. First is choosing to engage in a sinful relationship with someone that only is after your money. That leads to poverty. Financial poverty, emotionally and spiritual poverty. And next it gets, quote, worse. He warns choosing a relationship with someone else's spouse, wife or husband, will lead not only to financial loss, but a lifetime of scars. Next, the author will ask two rhetorical questions. Remember from our English class, a rhetorical question is used to assist us to provoke our thinking, to help us to reflect. The author will ask, do you actually believe you can engage in impurity and not be harmed, not be burned? Can a man scoop fire into his lap without his clothes being burned? Can a man walk on hot coals without his feet being scorched? Scorched, we'll come back to that word. So is he who sleeps with another man's wife. No one who touches her will go unpunished. The wisdom is telling us that all sexual immorality is playing with fire. The word for scorched literally means painful wounds that last a lifetime. This clear warning is there's no one in that relationship that will go unharmed. There's no situation where the short-term perceived pleasure will ever outweigh the long-term pain. Now in the next verses, the author will compare the consequences of adultery, the sin of adultery, with the sin of stealing. The point is the major difference is in a theft. The stolen property can be returned or perhaps and restored. But it's so much more difficult to restore the losses caused by the sin of adultery. People do not despise a thief if he is stealing to satisfy his hunger when he is starving. Yet if he is caught, he must pay sevenfold. The Jewish law required to be a payment of sevenfold, though it cost him all the wealth of his house. All sin is wrong, but not all sin is equal. Stealing food to feed your family will have consequences, but choosing adultery to feed your lust will have far deeper, lasting consequences. Under Jewish law, if a thief stole something, he had to make restitution by paying back 7 times the value that he stole, even if it cost him everything in his household. But it's much more difficult to quantify and to restore the damages caused by sexual sin. The author says, but a man who commits adultery has no sense, meaning he's a fool. Whoever does so destroys himself. Blows and disgrace are his lot, his future, and his shame will never be wiped away. Then the New Living Translation just shortens that verse too. But the man who commits adultery is an utter fool. He destroys himself. The person that chooses sexual immorality is, quote, a fool, unquote. Why? Because the pain is so much greater than the gain. The damage to yourself and to those people closest to you is so high. The loss of trust, reputation, financial, emotional, spiritual, all these costs last a lifetime. Pastors aren't immune to this. Sadly, many pastors have experienced this path. They've chosen that dark path, and it's cost them both their family and their ministries. The author closes with another practical risk, which is dealing with the fallout of the hurting husband and the hurting wives, and the others that you harm by making that decision. For jealousy arouses a husband's fury, and he will show no mercy when he takes revenge. He will not accept any compensation. He will refuse a bribe, meaning financial compensation, however great it is. The Hebrew word for fury is very telling. It means both uncontrollable fire, but it also means a bitter poison, a bitter venom. Our actions in sexual sin result in creating enemies that want to take revenge. It's so unlike a thief where you can have an objective formula for restitution. Someone that's been hurt, angry, bitter, brokenhearted, having this feeling of betrayal is very often irrational. And that situation does not end well for anyone. Bottom line, family, God's wisdom teaches that choosing sexual sin is highly destructive. That closes chapter 6. We'll continue with chapter 7 next week. Until then, may God bless you and your family with both grace and peace. Aloha.